This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Lo Hui-Su. Tonight's top stories. South Korea's president insisting that imposing martial law on December 3rd did not amount to rebellion. Yoon Suk-yeol also denying accusations of insurrection. EU leaders to work out how to keep up support for Ukraine in its war amid a possible pullback from Washington. A draft statement suggesting reluctance to call out Chinese support for Russia. The US voicing concern that Moscow could be making a U-turn after decades of commitment to ridding the Korean peninsula of nuclear weapons. A sea of red in Asian markets after a sobering message on rate cuts from the Fed triggers a sell-off on Wall Street. And also on East Asia Tonight, anniversary celebrations lined up in Macau as it marks 25 years since its return to China tomorrow. Our correspondent tells us how the city has adapted and what challenges still lie ahead. And CNA's current affairs documentary Inside takes a closer look into martial law that lasted just a few hours in South Korea. Hear from those who were there on the night. South Korea's National Assembly Speaker spoke to foreign press today in a bid to reassure the public and the country's allies. National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-shik said he will ensure lawmakers cooperate for a swift impeachment process for President Yoon Suk-yeol. He also said the priority now is to normalize state affairs and people's livelihoods and also to restore public trust. Meanwhile, the Constitutional Court has started gathering evidence for Mr. Yoon's impeachment trial. They want him to submit the martial law decree that he issued, as well as the minutes of 2 cabinet meetings linked to the declaration on the 3rd of December. The court has 180 days in which they need to decide whether to remove Mr. Yoon or to reinstate him in office. And for more, we're joined by CNA's Lim Yoon-suk in Seoul. Yoon-suk, the Speaker of the National Assembly, there outlining 3 routes in which he plans, or the authorities now plan, to stabilize the political crisis. What 3 plans might these be?
Well, yes, Woo Won-shik, the National Assembly Speaker, was talking to the foreign media, and he said there were 3 key challenges for the National Assembly now that it had passed the impeachment bill on December 14th. Now, one was to ensure a smooth impeachment process because a prolonged uncertainty will place a very heavy burden on the country. And the second was to ensure that there is a stable governance and the livelihood of the South Korean people. Now, he says that he thinks that there should be a formation and operation of a body comprised of the National Assembly and the government. And he said that this was an urgent issue. And right now, he was speaking to both the ruling and the opposition parties, although they had their differences, to try and expedite the establishment of this body. Now, he said the third task, he said, was to strengthen this parliament diplomacy. Now, let's hear what he first said. Let's hear first what he said on this issue at that briefing.
국제사회에 한국의 상황을 전달하고 불필요한 우려를 갖지 않도록 잘 설명할 필요가 있다고 생각합니다. 한 5개, 6개 팀이 될 텐데 여야 간에 합의를 했고요. 그래서 그 구성은 여야가 함께 가는 것으로 그렇게 지금 생각하고 있고 그렇게 추진되고 있습니다.
And he said that those teams would go to the United States, Japan, China, and some EU countries. And he didn't say Asia. And so after the press briefing, I went up to him and I asked him if he was also planning to send, a team to Asia. And he said that he had personally wanted to go and visit Asia himself, though his aide at the site then was saying that it was very likely that could be delayed because he was planning to do this sometime in January. And Speaker Woo said that if that is the case, then yes, he would also be sending a team to Asia, though he didn't say exactly which country. And also, it's very interesting that he said he decided to send those teams to those countries because he had received requests from the business sector, suggesting that businesses are also very concerned about how the image of South Korea could have been badly tarnished due to this martial law declaration.
Yoon Suk, this declaration of martial law, the president, President Yu, waiting in his impeachment trial, has been consistent in maintaining that he was forced to impose martial law due to what he calls anti-state forces, so opposition from the opposition blocking what he felt was ordinary functioning of the government. Speaker Wu has also responded to that. What did he have to say?
Well, yes. Speaker Wu, was first describing how when he first heard that President Yoon made the martial law declaration, he too was shocked like everyone else here in South Korea. And he said that images of the Gwangju massacre in 1980, where troops were sent into the south in Gwangju City to break out rallies by protesters, kept replaying in his mind because he too was a student then and protesting against the military leadership then. And apparently he spent 3 years in prison from 1981 for taking part in those protests. And so images of that time kept, replaying, kept coming up. And so in order to ensure that didn't happen again, he said he rushed to the National Assembly, climbed the walls, and went in time to hold that meeting together with the other lawmakers who were there to overturn the martial law decree. Now, he says that President Yoon's reasons for declaring the martial law was simply unconstitutional and that there was just no justification for it. And he said that President Yoon did very little to try and communicate his feelings or what he thought on several policies to Parliament. Now, let's hear what Speaker Wu said first.
국회 개원식에 대통령이 오지 않으셨고요. 그동안 꼭 그 예산을 설명하는 시정연설은 대통령이 대부분 다 하셨는데 이번에도 특별한 사유 없이 오시지 않으셔서 제가 국회의장석에서 오지 않는 것을 비판한 적도 있습니다.
And so Speaker Wu was saying that President Yoon made no attempt to try and communicate with the National Assembly. And when President Yoon declared martial law on December 3rd, President Yoon was accusing the National Assembly of becoming a monster that destroys the liberal democratic system and saying that it had proposed 22 motions to impeach government officials during his administration. And so he had no option but to declare that martial law. Now, Speaker Wu was asked what happens if the Constitutional Court rejects the impeachment bill. And he said, his job was to announce the result of the impeachment vote, hand it over to the Constitutional Court, and that's what he did. And so now it was really up to the Constitutional Court to do its job.
Our thanks. That CNA's Lim Yoon-suk speaking to us live there from Seoul. A draft statement out of an EU summit suggests European leaders are likely to avoid direct mention of Chinese involvement in Russia's war in Ukraine. But there is concern about Beijing's relations with Moscow. The document reportedly pointing to the European Council strongly condemning support by third countries for Russia's war efforts. The draft accusing North Korea and Iran of providing weapons, and in Pyongyang's case, sending troops to the battlefield. Reports suggest several EU states had pushed for China to be named and could still raise this at the summit in Brussels. Beijing has always rejected allegations that it is assisting Russia's war effort. And if more, Will Denslow joins us live from Brussels. Will, of course, this is a draft and far from the final statement. And EU countries, some of them reportedly still likely to raise that issue at this summit. Whatever comes out, as far as this statement is concerned, there is no absolute unity, at least on where the EU stands on China. So what is the EU's position at this point?
Well, what's perhaps important to remember is that, of course, as the old adage goes, actions speak louder than words. And if we cast our minds back just a few days, the European Union passed its 15th round of sanctions against Russia over its war in Ukraine. And for the first time, some Chinese entities were included in that tranche of sanctions for allegedly sending drone components to Russia. That, in turn, sparked a fierce reaction from Beijing, saying they will take necessary measures in response. Fast forward to this Council summit here in Brussels. Well, as you rightly mentioned, this draft does not include any specific reference to China. However, it does call for these third parties that you rightly mentioned to immediately cease assistance for Moscow going forward. It's understood, according to diplomats, there is somewhat of a concern of lumping China in the same category of Iran and North Korea, also alleged to be providing military assistance to Ukraine. There is seemingly a divergence in opinions here among EU member states. A number of countries, the likes of Czechia, Lithuania, Latvia, calling for stronger words against China, the likes of Germany, Slovakia, Spain, more hesitant perhaps. So there is certainly slight divisions there. But this, of course, all comes with Donald Trump set to take the presidency. And he's explicitly urged the EU to do more when it comes to pressuring China to do what they can to use their influence to stop the war in Ukraine.
Well, EU leaders will be likely using the summit as well to send a clear message to the incoming US president about the European stance on that war in Ukraine. Beyond rhetoric, as you say, you need to see where the action is. How is this commitment to Ukraine likely to be taking shape?
Well, Lithuania's president somewhat had a veiled message to Washington saying that Ukraine's future will be settled here in Europe and not elsewhere. This also comes as Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky here in Brussels. He's met with NATO's Secretary General last night. He's here in Brussels as well today. He said that the focus will be on providing Ukraine with more air defences as well as other capabilities to ensure their security. Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, says that support for Ukraine going forward is not only a moral imperative, he says it's a strategic imperative too. A number of issues when it comes to Ukraine's security, Ukraine's defence, will be on the docket during this meeting. Kaja Kallas, the European Union's new foreign affairs chief, simply says that there will be discussions on how to support Ukraine more.
Well, thanks. Will Denslow reporting live there from Brussels. Washington has sounded the alarm at a meeting of the UN Security Council. It's warning that Russia could be close to accepting a nuclear-armed North Korea. The US ambassador to the UN voiced concern that Moscow may reverse its decades-long commitment to denuclearizing the Korean peninsula. Moscow and Pyongyang have defended increasingly close links and cooperation, with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov calling the issue of denuclearizing the North a closed issue. North Korea's ambassador to the UN says his country's mutual defense treaty signed in June this year with Russia contributes to global peace.
It promotes the welfare of the people of both countries and served as the security mechanism for easing tension in the region and guaranteeing a strategic stability of the world. It becomes a positive contribution to international peace and security and can by no means be subject of the criticism. DPRK will never tolerate the arbitrary and high-handed practice of the United States and its following forces in their attempt to impose hegemonic unipolar system of domination.
Thousands of North Korean troops have been deployed on the front lines of the conflict in Ukraine. South Korean intelligence says there are preparations for additional deployment, but Pyongyang has made no mention of its involvement in that war or about claims made by the US and Kiev of heavy casualties in the Russian region of Kursk. Instead, North Korean state media has defended its alliance with Russia. It's also slammed the US and its allies for what it called reckless provocation after Washington criticized Pyongyang for getting involved in the war in Ukraine. South Korea's UN envoy is warning the Security Council that North Korea may escalate provocations ahead of the upcoming transition in leadership in Washington.
North Korea has a history of provocative actions during U.S. presidential transitions, designed to grab attention, raise the stakes, and set the stage for direct negotiations with the new U.S. administration.
Now still ahead on East Asia tonight, Asian stocks end the day in the red after market sell-off triggered by a change in the US Fed's inflation outlook. Reports suggest Apple is trying to find partners in China to roll out AI onto phones there. The Pentagon says corruption may have, quote, disrupted Chinese progress towards modernizing its military. An annual report from the U.S. Defense Department outlined a new wave of corruption investigations in 2023, which led to the removal of senior officials in the People's Liberation Army. More recently, last month, China suspended the leading officer who sits on a top military command body. Admiral Miao Hua was put under investigation for so-called serious violations of discipline. The Pentagon report says at least 15 senior army officials and industry executives were removed between July and December last year. And that's likely, according to one senior U.S. defense official, just the tip of the iceberg. Assistant Defense Secretary Eli Ratner says he did not think China would have taken such extreme measures unless it felt that there had been an impact on the effectiveness of its army. China has since fired back at that report. The Foreign Affairs Ministry today saying it was, quote, irresponsible, full of bias, and an excuse by the U.S. to maintain military dominance. Vietnam's largest ever defense exposition opened today in capital Hanoi. More than 200 companies from nearly 30 countries are taking part, including firms from rival nations such as the US, Russia, China, Israel, and Iran. They are showcasing some of their latest and most advanced weaponry. A notable presence is China, participating for the first time with a showcase from Chinese defense manufacturer Norinco Group. The company gained attention last year when reports suggested Hamas had used its assault rifles in its conflict with Israel. Vietnam, meantime, has been working to boost its capabilities to safeguard its coastline amid tensions in the South China Sea. It has long depended on Russia for military hardware, but is now seeking to diversify its source for defense supplies. This shift giving international arms manufacturers the chance to compete to meet Vietnam's growing defense needs. Sources tell CNA that Vietnam has signed a deal with the United States to purchase 13 U.S.-made C-130s.
Our goal is to ensure that Vietnam has what it needs to defend its interests at sea, in the air, on the ground, and in cyberspace. It is a reflection of the United States' commitment to work with Vietnam as it seeks to advance its goals, to diversify and modernize its military. It's a reflection of the U.S. commitment to work with Vietnam to ensure that it has the capabilities Vietnam needs to defend its sovereignty, its independence, and its territorial integrity.
And as we look to the future, I could see better cooperation for maritime security operations in maritime domain awareness and allowing each other to better have maritime domain awareness for the ability to secure EEZ rights for sovereign rights for each country.
Some of those attendees at Vietnam's largest ever defense expo. Now it's time for business with Roland Lim. Roland, stocks on this side of the world feeling the pinch today.
Unfortunately, investors have not had a good day. Asian markets tumbled after the Fed's cautionary outlook triggered a sell-off on Wall Street. Now all major indices closed in the red. The Kospi dealing with a double whammy of pressures abroad and domestic political drama at home. The market in Seoul closed nearly 2% in the red. This makes it Asia's worst performing market this year. The ASX in Sydney also taking a heavy blow amid pressure from increasing bets that the Reserve Bank of Australia will cut rates sooner and more significantly than initially expected. Hong Kong's paring losses but still ended in the red. Traders there digesting the Hong Kong Monetary Authority's latest rate decision. It delivered a 25 basis point rate cut in lockstep with the Fed. Overnight, the U.S. Federal Reserve lowered interest rates by a quarter point as expected, but the Fed did dial down expectations of rate cuts next year, given the continued strength of the U.S. economy and as inflation remains stubbornly above the central bank's 2% target. Fed officials are penciling in just 2 rate cuts next year, down from the previously expected 4 cuts, and then expect to make 2 cuts in 2026 and 1 in 2027. Investors have also been assessing the Bank of Japan's decision to keep its policy unchanged at 0.25% for the 3rd straight meeting. The Japanese yen dipped to a 1-month low against the greenback after BOJ governor said that the bank will continue raising policy rates if the economy moves in line with its forecasts. But Japan's central bank ended negative interest rates back in March and raised its short-term policy target to 0.25% in July. It has signaled a readiness to hike again if wages and prices move as projected. A closely watched quarterly survey released earlier this month showed that companies remain upbeat on business conditions and expect inflation to stay above the BOJ's 2% target in coming years. Analysts say waiting until the January meeting would allow the central bank to better examine wage growth trajectory in the country next year. Eyes will now be on China to see how or if authorities will move on their rates on Friday. A Reuters poll shows officials are expected to leave benchmark lending rates unchanged. The People's Bank of China is under pressure to carry out monetary easing due to a weakening renminbi and falling yields. Additionally, it pledged by the Politburo to switch to a looser monetary policy stance next year has heightened market expectations for more easing. The same poll by Reuters has found that market watchers expect 1-year and 5-year loan prime rates to remain steady. Chinese banks have raised their mortgage rates for the first time in 3 years, a surprising move amid a persistent property slump plaguing the world's #2 economy. Average housing home loans or interest rates for first-time home buyers stood at 3.08% in November. That's up from a record low of 3.05% the previous month. The change follows a stimulus push in September, which aimed to improve the sluggish housing market in China. Costs were lowered, about $5.3 trillion in outstanding mortgages, reducing borrowers' annual interest expenses by some $28 billion. Property prices, however, continued to fall despite a slight uptick in sales. Chinese banks are under pressure to combat their low profitability, which is hindering their ability to bring down interest rates. Analysts say this concerted move of mortgage rate increase is directed at regulators to increase a buffer for banks so that they can make bigger rate reductions in the future. Apple is reportedly in talks with internet giants Tencent and ByteDance to integrate their AI models into iPhones in China. This potential partnership comes on the heels of the rollout of ChatGPT into US Apple devices this month. However, the open AI product is blocked in China, and generative AI services in China must obtain government approval before its release. Pressure had been mounting on Apple to find a local partner for its AI features. The report by Reuters says Apple was in discussions with Baidu for its AI model earlier this month, but faced disputes over using iPhone user data as training materials for the AI models. The US tech giant has been facing major setbacks after its latest iPhones sold in China saw the absence of AI capabilities. There is heavy competition in the world's biggest smartphone market as Huawei makes a comeback with a phone that features Chinese-made chips and a large language model. Apple's market share has been declining because of disappointing sales in China. And that'll do it for the business news. Wei Su.
And thanks for that, Roland. And still ahead on East Asia tonight, Chinese President Xi Jinping hailing Macau's success as he visits the gambling hub to mark 25 years since its return to China. This is East Asia tonight. South Korea's president insisting his martial law declaration on the 3rd of December did not amount to rebellion. Yoon Suk-yeol also denying accusations of insurrection. EU leaders to work out how to keep up support for Ukraine in its war amid possible pullback from Washington. A draft statement suggesting reluctance to call out Chinese support for Russia. And the US voicing concern that Moscow could be making a U-turn after years of committing to ending nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula. Macau will mark 25 years since returning to Chinese administration tomorrow after more than 400 years under the Portuguese. The special administrative region has been hailed by Beijing as a good example of how it's possible to govern under the one country, two systems model. Chinese President Xi Jinping touring parts of Macau today. Tomorrow he will attend the inauguration of the city's new government. The city, meantime, is seeing a surge in tourists, all hoping to catch a glimpse of China's leader.
多咗國內嘅遊客，因為佢哋都係冇習主席嚟而多咗咯，即係特別多咗好多嗰啲遊客過嚟觀光啊，想看一看習主席。
And for more, we're joined by CNA's May Wong, live from Macau. May, lots of preparation, including security, ahead of tomorrow's celebrations.
Indeed, there is a lot of preparation simply because it is Chinese President Xi Jinping who is in town. He flew in on Wednesday evening and he is looking around Macau because when he landed, he said that he wants to observe the development here in Macau. He also had mentioned that Macau has accumulated its development and it has a very promising future ahead. So now he's assessing the development that was seen because he was here right about 5 years ago when Macau marked the 20th anniversary when this enclave was handed back to China to mark the 20th anniversary then. So he's back 5 years later now, marking the silver jubilee of 25 years. Now, when we talk about security, we're talking about the fact that earlier when I was boarding the ferry from Hong Kong here to Macau, about 1 hour's ferry ride away, they were doing tremendous checks. One person each time going through every bag, opening up every bag to make sure that people going from Hong Kong coming into Macau are not bringing in certain materials or certain kind of objects that will cause disruption for the security and safety here in Macau, given the fact that the Chinese president is here. In addition to that, once you land here in Macau as well, again, there's another round of security checks and bag checks. And obviously, this was not done about 2 weeks ago when I was here. So it only goes to show you that security has been stepped up. There are barricades in certain areas. Roads are going to be blocked, particularly in the routes where President Xi is expected to go. And right now, he is, I understand, at a gala dinner this evening, when tomorrow on Friday, he will then preside over the inauguration of the new Macau administration and also have the swearing in of the new chief executive for Macau over the next 5-year term. But remember here that there are concerns about the progress of Macau. There's a concern about the development here in Macau. And I spoke to some of the people on the ground, and let's take a listen.
77-year-old Yun Tin Yao has been making and selling the traditional dragon's beard candy for more than 40 years. The Macau native remains proud of his product made of maltose and flour with fillings such as peanuts and sesame till today. Aside from the candy being a popular snack in Macau, the government has also listed it as an intangible cultural heritage since 2020. But sustaining the business hasn't been easy.
嗰啲銷售量嚟計，當然命有用。疫情嗰陣時當然係好啲好多啦，但係有疫情之後咧，好多都嗰個成數都好低落，好低啊，低咗幾成都有㗎。
According to the Macau Tourism Office, visitors from China, Hong Kong and Taiwan make up the top 3 markets to the region. In the first 10 months of this year, top market of Chinese visitors saw more than 20 million setting foot in Macau. During the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, the number of China tourists fell to just 5 million. Renowned largely for its gaming industry, the former Portuguese colony is fairly unfamiliar to Western visitors.
They need to spread the culture, I think. Like if the other people know the culture, maybe they are more interested to come here and meet like all of you and all these beautiful places. Like till 2 months ago, like I didn't knew about Macau.
It's my first time ever in Macau. From someone who doesn't gamble, in my opinion, it's really beautiful anyway. So I really recommend to all the people to join Macau, not just for gambling, but there is a lot of more to discover.
For a region that's more than 30 times smaller in land size than neighboring Hong Kong, with about 700,000 residents, Macau's post-pandemic economic recovery has been impressive. According to the International Monetary Fund, this Chinese territory's economy grew by almost 81% last year, driven by a surge in export services after China lifted its pandemic restrictions. As part of China, Macau's economic performance is closely intertwined with Beijing's growth. The IMF last month revised down Macau's growth this year to 10.6% from its previous forecast of 13.9%.
It's not all glitz and glamour here in Macau that's known for its flashy and lucrative casino industry. Increasingly, Macau knows it needs to diversify its sources of income. It wants to shed its image of being known just as a gaming capital and attract more foreign investments in the likes of hosting, say, mega business conferences and even global sporting events. But that hasn't been easy. Observers believe that if Macau fails to transform itself as quickly as possible, it may end up facing even greater challenges in the near future.
Challenges that the incoming chief executive, Sam Ho-Fai, is quick to address. Outlining its vision for the city in the next 5 years, he wants to seize the opportunities offered by the Greater Bay Area project to implement economic diversification. He added that Macau has a solid financial foundation to push forward with the plan after the city recorded its highest level of fiscal surplus of over 76 billion. Along with neighboring Hong Kong, Chinese President Xi Jinping has urged the two autonomous regions to work closer together and further integrate themselves into China's broader development plans. An hour away by ferry from Hong Kong, many young Macau residents have been lured to the global financial center to seek better employment and business opportunities. Macau lawmaker Jose Pereira Coutinho therefore wants more non-gaming quality jobs created to retain local young talents and to formulate stronger policies to tackle social inequality.
Since the COVID, inequality is a very important issue to be tackled. The gap between the rich and poor is widening. So we are tackling these issues right now with the government policies such as subsidizing, giving direct subsidies to the poor family and the middle income.
Social service organization like Caritas Macau has been assisting needy residents for more than 40 years now. Since the city's handover to China in 1999, the Macau authorities have been placing strong emphasis on social welfare under the guidance of the Chinese central government. With their strong support, Caritas has been able to help at least 10,000 people every year through services like food bank handouts and elderly care services. But going forward, the organization foresees more people, especially the elderly and migrant workers, will require help.
而家澳門都有超過17萬嘅外僱，其中咧外僱之中咧有超過7萬嘅人咧唔係講中文嘅。 咁呢一批咧係嚟自唔同嘅國家地區咧，佢哋都需要一個支援嘅。好可惜咧，暫時我哋呢個環節咧嘅支援咧仲係有限嘅喺澳門。社福嘅服務咧，經濟援助嗰啲基本上唔會係面向佢哋嘅。
Aside from chasing high economic growth, some residents believe the authorities should also strive to cultivate a community that'll preserve the values and unique culture of Macau, rich with Chinese and Portuguese heritages.
May, this need to diversify the economy, that's been on the cards for Macau for years now. And the new CEO who will be sworn in, as you mentioned, tomorrow, he has made it very clear that that is his mission as well. What will stop Sam Ho Fai achieving progress on diversifying Macau's economy away from being just focused on casinos?
It is going to be a very difficult task given their huge reliance, as you mentioned. So it's not going to be easy and not going to flip overnight, simply because there are a lot of challenges at play. For one, the educational system, that is still really lackluster in terms of the standards of education here. Number two is the capability of the people. Remember, here in Macau, there are only 700,000 people living in Macau. And so the capabilities and the ability to switch and also to adapt, to cater to all these new areas that they're hoping to diversify into, that would be a challenge. Remember, here they want to diversify into areas such as modernizing the financial services here. They want to bring in more tourism. And as you can see over here is the ruins of St. Paul. And that is a reflection of the Portuguese influence. So that one final point I want to make here is that ultimately the central government is hoping that Macau can reach out to the Portuguese-speaking world in order to also bring in more crowds and bring in more areas of cooperation.
And thanks to CNA's Mei Wong there live from Macau, marking 25 years since return to Chinese rule. Still in East Asia tonight, a dramatic 2 weeks in South Korea from the declaration of a short-lived martial law to a president's impeachment. We'll hear from some who were there in person on that night. You're watching East Asia tonight. It's been a dramatic 2 weeks in South Korea from martial law to a president's impeachment. This week, CNA's weekly documentary Insight talks to some who witnessed events firsthand.
On the evening of December 3rd, Assemblyman Kim Jun-hyung had just wrapped up filming at a Korean TV station. Then he got wind of some incredible news.
I got called from my assistant in the office, and I heard shocking news that President declared martial law. Nobody believed, especially rational people, including me, didn't believe. So it's much unanticipated and a surprise news.
According to South Korea's constitution, the president can declare martial law during war, armed conflict, or a similar national emergency.
After that announcement, it caused immediate consternation that perhaps there is some intelligence about a security threat, presumably from North Korea, that the public was unaware of. As really the minutes went by, it became more and more clear that such a threat did not exist. And so people began to think that there really is not that kind of problem that Yoon had claimed.
So one thing just jumped into my mind is the president might block National Assemblyman. So I just ran into the National Assembly.
Within the hour, politicians and protesters gathered outside the National Assembly, South Korea's parliament. An Gi-ryong from the main opposition Democratic Party was among them.
제가 알기로는 더불어민주당 이재명 대표께서 대통령의 비상계엄 선포가 있은 다음에 유튜브 라이브를 통해서 국회로 가고 있다.
국민 여러분, 국회로 와주십시오. 무너지는 민주주의 여러분이 함께 나서 지켜주십시오.
The National Assembly legislators responded right away. They rushed to the legislature and initiated a vote to oppose the martial law.
The Constitution states that martial law must be lifted if a majority of South Korea's 300-seat parliament votes to do so. But at the National Assembly, lawmakers would find their way barred.
Police were deployed and then blocked the main gate. So I just got off car and just tried to get in, but they blocked me in. Some wrestled and physical contact, and I yelled at them, "You cannot block me."
At 11:28 p.m., the military reportedly issued a 6-point decree restricting political activity and the press. Defying the president and military, lawmakers found ways to enter the National Assembly building. Some, like opposition leader Lee Jae-myung, by jumping the fence. By midnight, over 150 lawmakers had gathered inside.
I got in after 20-30 minutes of wrestling.
Around this time, special forces also arrived at the National Assembly building.
If martial law had been imposed, President, the martial commander, would have had unchecked power, and they would have been able to dissolve any political congregations or arrest political opponents as they see fit. And they would have had near total control of the society.
Soldiers entered through broken windows, attempting to lock Parliament down.
한쪽에서 그렇게 이제 수많은 사람들이 몸으로 계엄군을 막고 있었고요. 막는 와중에 계엄군이 이제 팔을 잡기도 하고요. 밀쳐내기도 하고, 저도 이제 밀려나지 않기 위해서 이렇게 몸도 잡고 총도 잡고 그렇게 됐던 것 같습니다. 부끄럽지도 않냐고! 그리고 무서웠죠. 공포감은 국회에 도착해서 헬기 소리를 들을 때부터 쭉 엄습해 있었습니다. 그런데 그 순간에는 일단 막아야 된다. 이 계엄군들이 국회 본청 안으로 들어가면 국회의원들의 계엄 해제 관련 표결을 막을 것이고, 그러면 계엄 해제를 못하고.
Inside, 190 parliamentarians eventually made their way into chambers. They barred the doors to prevent soldiers from entering. A plenary session was hastily called as lawmakers rushed to vote on lifting martial law.
We are so scared. I'm scared. Even I imagined, what if they just break in and then shoot or arrest us? So we were really in a shock, at the same time, fearful, at the same time, determination to pass the law before we got arrested or something. So we are so impatient. We yelled, we asked, Speaker of the National Assembly to do fast.
For an in-depth assessment of what happened in South Korea, catch Inside airing December 19th, tonight at 9 p.m. on CNA. You can also catch up on CNA Video on Demand or CNA Insider's YouTube page. The Singapore government says a lapse in coordination and a misunderstanding led to some people's full identity card or NRIC numbers being published on a new online portal. Geraldine Yap tells us more.
We are very sorry to have caused them much anxiety. On behalf of ACRA, I would like to apologize.
What's very important is to be able to let all of you know what happened, and also to express our sincere regrets and apologies that it happened.
Apologizing at a media conference, the authorities laid out the events that led to some people's full NRIC numbers being reviewed online last week. In July, the Digital Development and Information Ministry, or MDDI, had sent out a circular to all government agencies, informing them to cease any planned use of masked NRIC numbers in new business processes and services. But the Accounting and Corporate Regulatory Authority, or ACRA, says there was a lapse in coordination on how this should be implemented, and the agency thought it should unmask all NRIC numbers in its updated BizFile portal. The portal had previously displayed only masked NRIC numbers in its research.
Our oversight has caused anxiety and confusion to the public. As the owner of the BizFile portal, ACRA should have been more mindful that many Singaporeans have long treated their NRIC numbers as private and confidential information and would not want to have their full NRIC numbers searchable on the new portal.
ACRA aims to resume the People Search function on the BizFile portal next week, but without NRIC numbers masked or full. Second Minister for Finance Indrani Raja acknowledges that this might cause some inconvenience, as users may not be able to as readily identify the specific individual they are looking for.
And given the public concerns in the wake of this incident, we felt it would be better not to show either partial or full for the present time. But what we are doing is looking to see whether there's any other way we can do this to make it easier for people to find the right person or the information they're looking for.
ACRA is checking on the total number of NRIC numbers available on the portal.
The simplest thing to do for anyone who may be concerned about this is, if you do have your NRIC as an authenticator, change it. Because even if it was searched and somebody was able to get your NRIC, that NRIC itself does not open a door unless it is being used as an authenticator.
Digital Development and Information Minister Josephine Teo says the government's decision to move away from using masked NRIC numbers doesn't mean unmasking all currently masked numbers. She adds that the government wants to change the status quo of using NRIC numbers as an authenticator.
Within government, we started to do a few things. Get agencies to stop using the NRIC number as a password or to prove someone is who he or she claims to be. Discontinue the use of masked NRIC numbers, starting with new services first, and then existing services as each service is updated.
The ministers acknowledged that the matter could have been communicated to the public better. They add that the government will be rolling out public education to raise awareness of the vulnerability of the current use of NRIC numbers.
We know this will take time, and that is why we are not rushing to change policy. We will start by focusing on the incorrect uses of NRIC numbers and stopping such practices. So you've got to put a stop to these kind of practices first. And this means moving away from using the NRIC number as a password and moving away from using the NRIC number as an authenticator to prove that a person is who he claims to be.
As for the private sector, the new policy direction has no impact for now, and current guidelines on collection and use of NRIC numbers still apply. The government says it plans to update its personal data protection guidelines to make clear its position on the use of masked NRIC numbers. The aim is to help put a stop to the improper use of NRIC numbers in passwords and for authentication purposes. But it reiterated that this will only be done after consultations with industry players and the public.
And that's East Asia Tonight this Thursday. Don't forget headlines anytime at cn8.asia, plus we're on Facebook and YouTube.